Hi everyone, it's Steph. This is the Noveltea Corner and welcome to another Psy-Changeling video. Today we are going to be talking about Blaze of Memory, which is book 7 in the Psy-Changeling series. Before we get into that book though, I do want to mention that the second live show for the Psy-Changeling readathon that I'm one of the co-hosts for is taking place this month on the 27th of February if you are in the US. It will be the 28th if you are in Australia. I will leave all of the details down below. It will be on my channel, so you don't have to go very far because that's where it's going to be. And I've already set up the scheduled live stream, so if you want to remember when it's going to happen, you can just click on that to get a reminder. We're going to be talking about Mind to Possess, Hostage to Pleasure, and Branded by Fire, which are some of my favourite books in the series overall, particularly in a row. I can't wait. So hopefully you'll join us for that. But like I said, all of the details are down below. Times, dates, links, co-hosts, etc. Check it out. But as I said, today I'm going to be talking about Blaze of Memory, which is book 7 in the Psy-Changeling series. This is going to be a long video, so feel free to get yourself a drink and a comfy place to sit. And I won't be offended if you put the video on 2x speed, because that's what I would probably do with a really long video like this. I won't hold the book up for the whole time, but I will just for the beginning. The main characters in this story are Devraj Santos, who we met in Mind to Possess. He is the director of the Shine Foundation, which we found out is an organization that tracks the children and the descendants of the Forgotten, the Psy who left the Psy-Net before silence was imposed. And it is his relationship with Katia Haas, who we also met in Mind to Possess. She was the lab assistant to Ashira Aline, and we didn't really hear or find out what happened to her at the end of that book. So this is their story. And there's a whole lot of world building stuff that goes on. There's a whole lot of things that I absolutely just adored, which are going to come in my fun things section at the very end. What I want to say overall about this story in terms of content warnings, there's kidnapping, there's torture. Most of that happens off the page. Being the series, it's a fated mate story, but Dev is quite an overbearing, controlling male character in the story. He's not one of my favorites, but on a reread, I could appreciate a little bit more. He's under a lot of pressure, which is not an excuse. He's never really had to deal with people beyond that capacity of leading them. And so he finds it really hard to not boss Katia around. And when we meet her at the beginning of the story, and I'll talk about that in a minute, she's really not in the right frame of mind to stand up to someone like that. So there is a very interesting power imbalance in this one. I don't think it's quite as bad as Visions to Heat. It didn't bother me as much as that one, because Katia does still stand up for herself at some points, but just keep that in mind. We open the book with a bit of a prelude that talks a little bit about the Forgotten who left the Psy-Net at the beginning of Silence. And we find out that a lot of the Psy who left were telepaths or empaths. There are a lot of people who had medical designations or were psychometrics or even had foresight abilities who left because Silence really inhibited those abilities. And we know from previous books that the Forgotten sort of left the net and then they intermarried with changelings and with humans, and so their bloodlines have sort of been diluted a little bit, but every now and then some of their descendants are born with psychic abilities. And that's the basic premise. So we spend a lot more time with these descendants of the Forgotten in this series, who are Psy, but they're also human. As we begin, a woman wakes up in hospital with no memory of who she is. The people who are treating her talk about the fact that she was literally dumped at Dev's doorstep and he brought her to Shine to be treated. They know that she's Psy. They're concerned that she is possibly a spy or someone sent into Shine to do some damage to the organization, but they don't know who she is. Dev ends up contacting Talon, who he helped in Mind to Possess, and asks for help in identifying this woman because he believes that she might have been involved in some of the different plots that have happened, because it's not usual for Psy to kick one of their own out. Talon puts him on to Ashira, who identifies her as Ekaterina Haas, who was her lab assistant. Ashira had thought that her assistant had died as a result of everything that had happened between Mind to Possess and Hostage to Pleasure. And so she and Dorian come out to Shine to visit with her, and Ekaterina doesn't really want to see anyone at that point. As Dev starts working with her and talking to her about her past and her name, she's triggered and she has a seizure, and so they end up trying to find a variation of her name that she can respond to that won't set off previous memories, because while she's been unconscious, she's been dreaming of the torture that Ming Lebon, who is one of the Psy counselors and the head of the Arrows, has been putting her through in her time in captivity. She eventually settles on the name Katia, so that's the name that we'll use for the rest of the book because it's the name that she does use. Dev is quite open and honest with her and tells her that he believes that she's a threat and he's going to be keeping an eye on her, and at the same time he's also quite affectionate towards her, and it's something that is pretty common with him. Even though he's a bit of a hard ass at times, he has a soft spot for anyone who he thinks is in trouble or is weaker than he is. He ends up brushing out her hair, and while he's doing that, she tells him that she wants him to kill her if at any point she shows signs of being a threat to him or to the Shine Foundation. Because she's still very confused. She's not entirely sure what's going on. Her memories have not come back yet, and she doesn't know what she's capable of at this point in time. Another example of this is when she's released from the medical center. He goes to take her to his home, and she has a panic attack before she gets into a lift because she doesn't want to be in confined spaces. And he ends up holding her for about 10 minutes. And then eventually they do make it to his house, which is quite secluded, and he's chosen that specifically because no one else is around them. She's not a threat to anyone except him, and he is quite capable of looking after himself. She's virtually a prisoner. She acknowledges that. He acknowledges that. And they sort of just have to deal with it. While they're at his place, Dev receives a call from Glenn, one of the medical staff and in his foundation, who tells him that they have found a true telepath child who has been kept in a mental facility because for his entire life everyone has thought he's schizophrenic. And Glenn wants Dev to come and work with him because Dev is quite good with working with kids. At the same time, Katya has another nightmare about the time that she spent with Ming, and the only way that Dev can think of to wake her up, because she's not waking up, is to kiss her, and that's their first kiss within this book. The whole way through this book there are hints that there is some dissent within the Shine organization between the people who run the foundation as well as the teenagers who are sort of on the cusp between being the kids who are being helped by the foundation and being adults who are actively involved within it, as well as a few other things that come up that I'll talk about a little bit later on. And there's a group of teens who want to break away from the organization, and Dev gives his authorization for that because he doesn't want to spend time fighting that. He decides if they want to come back, they're more than welcome, but he's not going to spend time and resources trying to keep them involved in the group, because that's not the point of the Shine Foundation. Dev and Katya have a discussion around the gaps in her knowledge around what happened between the end of Mind to Possess and now, which involves letting her know that Nor and John did actually escape. So those were the two kids that Ashira and Katya were trying to get out of Psy control, and that they're both living really comfortably in Dark River territory. They've both been adopted and they're doing really well. We also find out that Dev's cousin Jack has a young son called Will who has psychic telekinetic abilities, and that he's really struggling with them, and that this little boy, who is absolutely adorable, believes that he's bad inside. And that's also prompting a lot of discussions within the Shine Foundation about whether or not they have enough measures in place to support really strong psychic abilities in the Forgotten. Eventually, Dev returns to Manhattan to work with Cruz, who is the telepath child. While they're there, he basically locks Katya in her own suite of rooms, and she begins to remember her true capabilities. She is an MPSI. I think she's about 4.5 on the scale for an MPSI, and she's 4 point something as a telepath. However, her MPSI abilities allow her to amplify her telepathy. She attempts to do that, which is a big no-no within the Shine Foundation because they do actually have telepaths there. And one of them, Tag, ends up incapacitating her because he doesn't even know that she's there, which of course reveals something of her abilities to Dev, who didn't realize that she could be that strong. Eventually, Dev, Katya, and a group of Shine telepaths take Cruz into Dark River territory to work with Sasha so that Sasha can help this child who has never had mental shields to build those shields in order to contain his abilities so that he isn't feeling like he's going crazy. While she's there, Katya has the opportunity to meet with Nor and John. She really wants to apologize for her part in their captivity. However, while they're talking, John reminds her that she was actively trying to stop the worst of the experiments on both of them, and that she was actually assaulted as a result of trying to stop the other, I've forgotten his name, the other guy who was the assistant in the lab, from doing even worse things to John. So the whole thing is a bit of a cathartic experience for her. Up until this point, Katya has sort of been trapped in her own mind. She still is connected to the Psynet, but she doesn't really have access to it. She's very much contained inside her own head as the result of something that Ming has done. This prison that her mind is in is actually something that Ming has designed to be reinforced by her own abilities. So she's keeping herself locked within her own mind, and she doesn't quite know how to sort of break free from that without causing any problems. However, the whole time she's having these nightmares about what she saw while she was with Ming. She has these memories that she's not sure about, and she has this really bad feeling about something, and she doesn't know what it is or where it is, but she knows that it's north, I'm pretty sure is what she was telling everyone. She's constantly trying to get Dev to let her go so that she can go and find this wrong thing that's giving her such a bad feeling. While they're in Dark River territory, Dev and Katya have their first sexual encounter, And then afterwards, she ends up drugging Dev and the 2 telepaths that they've taken with them so that she can escape. She ends up stealing a car and trying to find the source of this bad feeling. One of Dev's cousins, who happens to be a police officer, ends up catching up with her and holds her until Dev arrives. And then Dev finally relents and gives her 3 days to find what it is that she's looking for. And he goes with her. And they end up traveling to Sunshine, Alaska, which is a very small town and apparently had a population of about 500 people. And the town itself was owned by a group called the Earth 2 Mining Group, which was a Psy group that bought the town 150 years earlier. The town is basically a ghost town. They can't find anyone. And as they were exploring the different buildings, they end up finding a walk-in freezer. And inside there, they find the bodies of many of the townspeople. As it turns out, there was some form of airborne virus that affected the town, particularly the Psy who were working there, and some of them went insane, turned on the other people and killed them. Ming was the person to cover it up. So this is sort of like a dirty little secret that the Psy have. So after they leave the town, Cartier's programming finally kicks in and she attempts to kill Dev with a knife. And the only way that she can stop herself from doing it is by stabbing herself in the leg. Dev ends up getting both of them back to the Shine Foundation to see if they can undo what is wrong with her mind. Meanwhile, we go back to Dev's nephew, William, who thinks that he's bad inside, and he's visited by Judd at night, who has been contacted through the various connections between the Shine Foundation and the Changelings to see if he can help this boy. And what he discovers is that William is a TK cell just like him. And so he begins training him that night to control his abilities, which as a result leaves William feeling much more confident and safe and happy. And so the next morning when his parents wake up, they almost have their little boy back again. And William tells his parents that an arrow came to visit him in the night to teach him. And the whole scene is just really beautiful and sweet. There's a connection to a scene that happened earlier in the book that I've included in the fun things section, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, but wasn't overly critical to the overarching plot. Anyway, moving on. So Cartier has been unable to complete the task Ming has programmed her to do, and as a result there's sort of like a time bomb in her head, and so basically her mind starts to degrade. With little time left, Dev and Cartier set a trap for Ming, and she ends up shooting him in the head. However, he doesn't end up dying, but he is out of commission for a while. Cartier's condition continues to degrade and she is hospitalized and is eventually unconscious, but Dev stays with her. Shire and Dorian come up with Keenan and Nor and visit with her. And while all of the adults are out of the room, the 2 kids end up crawling up onto Cartier's bed and fall asleep on her. When the adults come back into the room, they go to sort of move them, but Dev tells them to leave them there because it would make Cartier happy to have them there because the kids are quite happy and peaceful. What they don't realize until the next morning is that Nor and Keenan have complementary psychic abilities and have spent the night healing Cartier's brain. We find out that Keenan is a telepath who is also a mid-range conduit, and Nor describes herself as a weaver. And so they've spent the night together fixing Cartier's brain, and it's just a really gorgeous little scene, and it starts a little bit of a conversation around pairs of psychic abilities that work really well together. And it's these 2 kids and they are utterly adorable. I love them. Obviously Cartier then wakes up, she and Dev have their happily ever after, and that's the main romantic subplot of the story. In terms of world building, the story is set in 2080. We find out that as a result of all of the violence happening within the Psy, the council has put forward an optional / voluntary silence rehabilitation program, which some of the Psy are taking up because some of them are concerned that they're going to have the psychic breaks that some of the other Psy have had. We find out really early on in the story that the mole within the Shine Foundation that was suggested in Mind to Possess has been killed by Dev. So that's no longer an issue. There's no more leaks coming out of the Shine Foundation to the Psy. And we find out that there is something called the Shadow Net, which is the psychic network that the Forgotten created when they left the Psy-Net. And this is the psychic network that supports the descendants of the Forgotten. However, as the generations have changed and adapted, the Shadow Net really struggles to incorporate full Psy into it because of the way that the descendants of the Forgotten have evolved over time. Caleb reveals to Nikita that the Psy-Net is dying and shows her the parts of the Psy-Net that are actually already diseased or dead, and this causes great concern to both of them. There is a Psy attack in Sri Lanka, and Shoshana covers it up in the media by blaming it on Jack's junkies. So Jack's is the drug that affects the Psy in really negative ways. And later on, when they're discussing it, we begin to see the shift in dynamic between Shoshana and Henry, and Shoshana is no longer the dominant partner in the group. Henry is becoming far more dominant and has greater plans. And he also reveals that the instability in the net is a result of the anchors failing. And we find out that the anchors are actually Psy who are born with the ability to merge with the net, and that keeps it stable. However, if and when an anchor fails, they are more prone to also becoming a serial killer as a result. So I can't remember if much more is done with that over time. I think it is, but I've forgotten where it happens in the series. But I'd completely forgotten about that fact. Anthony Kyriakis begins to publicly question Ming's hold over the arrows, and that's highlighted when Ming talks to Aiden, who is one of the arrow medics, about the arrows who have been negatively affected by Jack's use. So Jack's was a drug created to control the arrows and make them more efficient. And we know that Judd was on it, but he got off it because he basically lied and said that it was impeding his abilities. However, there are arrows still on it. Ming decides to start to wean some of them off the drug to enhance their capabilities. And what he doesn't realize is that when he discusses this with Aiden, Aiden sees it as an opportunity to further distance the arrows from Ming and to lessen his control over the team. There's also a scene where Judd meets with Father Perez and the ghost, and during this scene, Father Perez talks about his lost love, Nina, to Judd. We do revisit the story of Father Perez and Nina in a later book, and afterwards the ghost gives Judd the location of the arrows who have been taken off Jack's. And then finally, we have a scene between Aiden and Vasek. So Aiden is the arrow medic and Vasek is the arrow teleporter, who we've seen pop up in many, many books, quite literally. They talk about whether or not to kill Ming while he's currently down after he's been shot by Katia. And they ultimately decide not to do it. I don't know why. They should have just done it. It would have made life so much simpler for everyone. And then we come to my fun things section. There were so many little cute scenes in this book. I just loved it. For me, this book is all about the world building stuff, and these little tiny little details that just make me happy. So when Dev first calls Ashaya to ask whether she knows who the mysterious woman with no memory in his medical facility is, Keenan answers the phone, which is really cute. And he answers the phone because Ashaya is baking cookies for him. And then as soon as the phone call is done, they go back to baking cookies together. And I just thought it's the cutest scene because you have a Psy mother baking cookies with her son, and I loved it. We find out that Dev really likes photography, and that's when Katia admires a lot of his photography within his home, and she recognizes that it's very him, the way that he's taken the photos. And I thought that was a really nice scene to have because we don't have a whole lot of male characters with just hobbies. Particularly the changelings, they all tend to revolve around fighting or training or whatever, but Dev likes photography, and I thought that was just a really nice little tidbit. When they find out that Cruz, the telepathic boy that the Shine Foundation find, is actually a cardinal level telepath, I don't think I said that before, he's a cardinal level telepath. There's a little bit of a thought process from Dev around the fact that there's probably actually less than 5,000 cardinals within the entire world, and that cardinals are rarer than people think. Obviously, because we're reading a series about the book, we have more cardinals pop up, so it's a higher percentage. But he just talks about how rare it is to find an unknown cardinal because there's so few of them. Judd has an absolutely adorable scene with Nor fairly early on in the book, and they're mostly just talking, and the scene ends with Nor telling Judd that they're the same. And this really ties back into that scene very much at the end of the book where Nor is healing Katia, because we know that Judd's TK cell ability allows him to manipulate things at a cellular level, and that in Caressed by Ice, he actually knitted someone's heart back together as a result. So he's not medically trained, but he has the ability to manipulate things at that level in order to save a life, which of course then refers back to the fact that Nor is able to knit Katia's brain back together. So she's not a TK cell, but she has a similar ability. Judd has no idea at that time when she tells him this, what that actually means. He doesn't think that they're anything alike because she's very bright and bubbly and sunshiny, and he's still very Judd. But she is insistent that they're the same, and it is just a precious scene. And like I said, Judd needs all of the scenes with the kids because they're always so cute. When Katia initially arrives in Dark River territory, Mercy gives her phone number, just in case, because Mercy takes one look at Dev and the way that Dev treats Katia initially by being overbearing and demanding, and goes, "If you need anything, call me," which I thought was just a really nice scene to see women standing up for other women, because she does it in front of Dev and lets Dev know that if he does anything wrong, Katia's got someone to call, which I really liked. There is a little bit of info about setting up a pack, which I thought was really fascinating to read about, because Dev is asking Lucas about the process of setting up a pack because there's a new pack relatively close to Shine territory and he wants to know whether that pack was doing the right thing or the wrong thing. There's a really cute scene where we find out that Nor intends to marry Keenan when they're older, which would be perfect because the two are two sides of the coin and they're so cute. We need all of those books with all of the kids. That has to be the next series after Psy-Trinity. We just want to see all of them. And then there's a little thing around the way that some of the Psy powers or the Psy abilities skew towards males or females. So empaths tend to be females, telekinetics tend to be males, and telekinetics tend to be more violent than any of the other Psy race. We also have the first mention of the ex-Psy designation in this book, and that becomes really important later on. So that is everything that has happened in Blaze of Memory. There was a lot that happened, and while the romantic storyline is probably not my favourite, and Dev is definitely not one of my favourite heroes, the actual world building continues to be really incredible with just the way that the overarching plot lines are developed and woven together. And, you know, any book that features really cute scenes with Judd and kids makes me really happy. So I can't really complain. As I said before, I will leave all of the details for the Psy-Changeling readathon down below. I am working a little bit ahead of that, but we do have our live show coming up in Feb. We would love to have you join us. Feel free to discuss the book down below. I'd love to chat to you about it. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.